Hello, my name is David Ades. I'm a poet in Sydney and the host of a monthly poetry reading series and podcast series called Poets Corner in association with WestWords in Parramatta in Sydney's West. WestWords is Western Sydney's literature development organisation. Poets Corner is part of WestWords' public programming that celebrates the richness, diversity and insight that literature offers. Especially in these times, we thank the ongoing support of Create New South Wales, the Cultural Fund of Copyright Australia, City of Parramatta Council, Blacktown City Council and Campbelltown City Council, as well as the many project partners that have enabled us to continue to provide opportunities to writers and audiences. We hope that this new world will see a sharing and a closeness of spirit. So each month I invite a poet to read poems and talk about them for an hour or so on a theme of the poet's choice. Our guest poet today is Rachael Mead, whom I will introduce in a moment, and she will read poems and talk on the theme of writing the parts, sensing the whole, the ecosystem beyond the window. But first, an acknowledgement of country. I'm recording this from Beecroft in Sydney. Rachael is recording from Basket Range in the Adelaide Hills in South Australia. I would like to pay my respects to and acknowledge the elders, past, present and emerging, of the Wallameda people, the traditional custodians of the land in Beecroft, and of the Paramank people, the traditional custodians of the land in Basket Range. And to acknowledge also that they are the sovereign owners of their land, which has never been ceded or given up. Rachael Mead is a South Australian poet, writer and arts reviewer. The most recent of her 4 poetry collections, The Flaw in the Pattern, was published with UWA Publishing in 2018. Her debut novel, The Application of Pressure, was published by Affirm Press during lockdown in 2020. An excerpt from her next novel, The Art of Breaking Ice, was awarded Varuna's 2021 Mick Dark Fellowship for Environmental Writing. In 2020, she won the Poetry d'Amour Prize, and in 2019, she was awarded the AP NAHR Eco-Poetry Fellowship offered by Australian Poetry and Nature, Art and Habitat for a month-long residency in the Taleggio Valley in northern Italy. Hi, Rachael, and welcome to Poets Corner.
Hi, David. Thanks so much for having me. It's a real honour to be involved.
Oh, it's wonderful to have you. Actually, I think you were the first kind of environmentally focused poet that we've had on Poets Corner so far. You've chosen the theme, writing the parts, sensing the whole, the ecosystem beyond the window. And I thought I'd start by asking you the question, what does the term eco-poetry mean to you, and how do you see your poetry fitting in the context of that term?
That's a great place to start. Well, eco-poetry is one of those terms that everyone comes to it with a slightly different take. So I guess my version of that is that it's a little different from the catch-all term of nature poetry, in that I think that it's a little more, I guess, ecocentric in philosophy, in that it's acknowledging that humans are part of our ecosystem and our global systems, and not sort of the center of everything, and certainly not at the pinnacle. We're just enmeshed in a web of interdependencies. And so I guess trying to flatten out the hierarchy, and sort of just acknowledge the fact that we do depend on other species, and that I guess that involves bringing a little bit more of a sense of perhaps activism to the poetry, not in a sort of finger shaking, table thumping sense, but in the sense that that there's something going on underneath the poetry that is, oh, shivers, sorry, that's my alarm to tell me that I'm running late. Sorry. That there is an activist sense to the poetry as well, in that I'm trying to challenge accepted value systems and suggest that there may be different perspectives and different ways of looking at the world.
Yeah, I get that from your poetry, and it's a very consistent theme throughout your work. And it's not just about the writing and the poetry, is it? It's about your relationship with the world.
Well, thank you for saying that, because I often feel that that sometimes I'm being a little too subtle, and that and that if any that sort of drive is I'm burying it too effectively. So it's nice to know that readers are picking up on it. Thank you. But it's I'm also very aware that. But I'm just speaking as one person. I do tend to favour the poetic eye, in that the speaking only from my own perspective, rather than trying to speak for other people or other species. And sorry, not quite sure where I'm just going to trail off there.
Okay, well. I was reading some of your other poems sort of in preparation for today. I noticed that there were many lines in the poems that address that relationship. And the one example that summed it up really well for me is in your poem In the Quiet, where you write, "This is pure desire for quiet pieces of the world, to touch something ancient and leave only wonder and the barest fingerprint." So it's about the awe, the joy, the connection, and also, you know, the way that we take our place amongst all those things, isn't it?
Yes, and also that acknowledgement that that humanity has now left as such a significant imprint on the world, that with the naming of the Anthropocene, that's an acknowledgement that humanity has such a phenomenal impact on the globe, that we're now our own geological era. So that drive or consideration to rein in human impact, that is really important to me, and something that I think I keep coming back to again and again.
All right. Well, we've been sort of tantalizing our audience by talking about your work without actually hearing any of it. So how about we have a poem?
Okay, easy. Shall I? Which one would you like me to start with?
Oh, I just thought you'd go in the order that you gave them to me: the dog, the blackbird, and the anxious mind.
Okay, great. Sorry, I had put my list aside. Thank you. Okay. The dog, the blackbird, and the anxious mind. The dog sleeps on the couch as if he's crash landed. Cold light from ABC breakfast is bluing the walls, and I'm antsy as the blackbird beyond the window, fossicking the same ground over and over, the shadows and the leaf litter, where no one else wants to look. The dog and I both need to be walked. He drags me as if I'm emotional baggage he's desperate to escape. We are linked by more than the lead, more than the family of mammals, the family of pasts we want to forget. Both of us are rescued creatures. And while I know it's a mistake to confuse kinship with intimacy, my mind shies from the thought that he stands ahead of me in the long queue for the grave. My feet spin the earth like a treadmill until my blood does its rich work, and I start to see the world again as more than a cold pebble hurtling through space, pursuing its own adventures. Everything is standing up, brimming with its own life, and like the blackbird, I can't leave it alone, going over and over this world, looking out through eyes ringed with gold.
Yeah, for me, this poem captures our innate restlessness and endless interrogation of the world and our place in it. It reminds me of the Greek poet Odysseus Aletus in his work, The Axion Esti, who called the world, this small world, the great. It's everything we have.
Oh, that's good.
But we have a conflicted relationship with it, don't we?
Yes. And it's with this poem, I was also trying to bring in a sense of getting into the getting into the details, and the when you know that you want to write a poem, and it's like you put on your poet's glasses and you start seeing those little tiny details that are that, even though they're so minute, they do start to speak of, like, but with their specificity, I guess, they start to speak of larger things. So and I think that poem is also talking a little bit about that, not just relationships with other species, like the bird, but it is also it's also talking about mental illness, and that need to the daily management of the writing life, and living with depression and anxiety. So, and how they can feed into each other, I think, and that that often I find personally that it's the by going about those small day-to-day tasks that get me through each day are also those tasks that really help to feed into the writing.
So what do you mean by, and what do you think we are trying to do when you say we are going over and over this world?
Well, that's getting into what I was saying before about the trying to see, I guess, the silver lining to that anxious tick of overthinking things. So I tend to do that, and often going out for a walk is a way to sort of slow that tendency down, to get outside, and it gives you a better sense of perspective. It's sort of when your world, it feels like you've put on the anxiety helmet, and the thoughts are all just banging around and not going anywhere. And often getting outside and going for a walk, I find, takes the helmet off and breaks me out of that overthinking cycle. So, your brain is still ticking over, and so suddenly, rather than stressing over the thoughts about all the things you have to do in the day, getting outside, I find, makes me start thinking about what I'm observing of the natural world. And when you watch blackbirds, we have lots. I mean, they're not native species, but they are. I love them. They're a species of thrush, and so they have a very beautiful song. And I love watching them. They tend to be in the undergrowth, often at ground level, just sort of fossicking around in the leaf litter and throwing bits and pieces out, and gathering insects and invertebrates and things. So, and that often feels to me like when you're writing a poem, you're often sort of fossicking around and trying to find, turning things over and looking at them from a different perspective, and that feels very Blackbird-esque to me. So it was a great, I think there were great parallels there between writing poetry and, observing blackbird behaviour.
Mm. All right. Would you like to read us another poem?
Sure. So the next one that I'm going to read is from a longer cycle about Kaditanda, which is Lake Eyre, and is quite old now, but it's about a camping trip to Kaditanda when the rains had after quite a lengthy drought, had refilled the Lake Eyre for the first time in ages. So it's a longer cycle about that trip, but this is the first poem in it. Edges. Driving out, heading for emptiness. Our body as compasses. We point north. Through suburbia rolled so thick, the idea that this could be nature is conceded against every instinct. Legume blankets peel from the road, lurid, as if green were a primary colour. We head for the ranges, still so distant they seem a ripped edge of sky. Finally, the land folds open into twin sheets of desert, held together by the seam of road, overlocked with long stitches of barbed wire and fence post. But our eyes love edges, all else too vast to hold our attention. We seek those flourishing boundaries where everything breaks cover, relishing the fleeting spotlight. Saltbush stubble scrapes against air, hard-muscled and lean, until finally the ranges are fisting up from the plains, knuckles clenched and ripped to the bone. In this dry home of the Kwandong, I hunger for an apple, the crack of crisp flesh between my teeth, the sweet acid sluice of dust, the simple taste of rain.
So like you said, this is part of a sequence of poems, a wonderful sequence of poems. Did you want to tell us a little bit about the sequence and what you were trying to do in the sequence?
Well, I was trying to be clever and and link all of the poems together by reusing the last line of the previous poem as the first line of the next poem, and then linking them all in the sequence. I think there are about 7 poems in the sequence, and then having the final line of the sequence link right back to the first line of the entire sequence. So, which was, when you say it aloud, it's a bit of a very obvious, ham-fisted way of, hinting at ecological connectivity. But the poems are all quite different in form. So, I was trying with each of the linking lines to choose words or phrases that hold within them a sense of ambiguity of meaning, so that I could play with the line in one way in one poem and then flip it and have a different sense of meaning in the following poem. So it was, and I must admit, that was something that I had blatantly ripped off Andy Kassane, whose poetry I absolutely loved. He'd done that in a sonnet cycle that in a previous collection that I had read, and thought, that's brilliant, I love that. And then sort of thought, these aren't sonnets, so it's not a total rip-off. But and I'm sure that there's probably it seems so obvious a thing to do. There must be a name for it, but I just don't know what it's called. So I'm just calling it the Andy Kassane sequence.
We poets are nothing if not bowerbirds when it comes to getting ideas and thoughts about poems and form. So I now live a very urban life, and probably for most of my life have lived a very urban life, but it seems increasingly crowded and frantic. And I'm conscious that most of us live lives that are confined and closed, that are full of boundaries, that we have to a large extent lost touch with the elemental, I think, not just in terms of nature, but also the elemental within ourselves. Do you think there is a huge forgetfulness involved in losing touch with the elemental?
Well, yes. And the only reason I think that is because I grew up in suburbia and had very little sense of non-human nature. To me, when I look back on my childhood, I'm all of the symbols and that I remember from growing up in suburbia. It's all human dominated. Like I remember houses and fences and roads and streetlights and asphalt. And I guess the reason that I'm sort of a little bit born again, really, that's why my poetry sort of feels a little bit overzealous, I guess, is because I only moved away from into a more rural landscape in my early 20s. And it was almost as if suddenly I was seeing the world in negative, like suddenly the human aspects of the landscape were minimal, and I was sort of seeing everything that I wasn't seeing before. And now when I go down to suburbia, I'm conscious of seeing. The first things I notice are trees and birds and the insects, and it's almost as if all of those human aspects of the landscape that I had previously only seen are now secondary to. So yes, I think that having it's almost as if I had the blinkers taken off, and so I think that's that's why I guess I write the poetry that I do, is because I still have that sense of wonder, because it was something I came to later in life with this amazing sense of discovery and excitement.
Yeah, it's funny that you should say that, because this poem and the series of poems that it's from seemed to me like a kind of touchstone, or a poem to self, just to remind yourself that this is all out there, and all you have to do is just go out and get there and have a look at it and be part of it.
I think it's also one of the challenges. I'm really lucky in that living where I do, I can just step outside and I'm surrounded by trees and insects and birds. And I'm very conscious that for people in urban and suburban environments, that it's not quite so easy. You have to actually make this phenomenal effort, really, to get your body out of that environment and into that's not to say that urban and suburban environments aren't environments. It just takes a little more diligence to begin to notice those non-human aspects of them, I guess. So yeah, it does take a lot more effort and a lot more you have to be more conscientious about it, I guess. I'm constantly aware of how lucky and privileged I am to live where I do.
And there's a consciousness, isn't there, that you start off heading off into emptiness, that by the end, of course, you've got the understanding that it's not emptiness at all. It's in fact very full, but it's a different way of being. But then you're in that way of being and you crave what you left behind.
Yeah.
Human contradiction,
yes,
isn't it?
It's that human tendency, isn't it, to always be to always have playing in the back of our minds the consciousness of no matter where we are, we're always thinking about where we're not.
All right, do you want to read us another poem?
Yeah, sure. Sorry, I read them in the wrong order. Right. I was okay. I'll go back to number 2 now. I hope that didn't sound like it threw you, so that's good. This one is the polar tent. Here on the ice, we are face to face with blizzards, pulsing our body heat within these layers and almost not making the distance. We're only just holding our shit together, clinging to survival with gloved fingertips, not wanting to acknowledge that this lack of traction might mean we're not meant to be here. So we sit in the tent, the glowing orange walls giving us fake bottom of the world tans on skin that is wrinkling before our eyes, the cold drawing years out of us, as if we really are on some other planet that has taken decades to reach. It feels this way, the distance from the known world, the religious faith in gadgets, this feeling of utter skinlessness under the onslaught of alien weather. We channel pioneer spirit to each other, tent etiquette distilled to micro-expressions. What is not said, shouted in each other's faces when the wind shriek pauses for breath. We're not saying anything new. Impatience and fear held in the bones around our eyes. Everything feels too hard. A cup of water demands chiseled ice and an hour on the primus. Not even sleep is simple. Darkness must be manufactured. We pull beanies over our eyes and lie back against the soft pretense that the earth has dipped its axis and is tilting us into night. Loosening our white-knuckled grip, we slip our necks from fear's noose and finally plunge, boot first, into deep, courageous sleep.
Yeah, by way of prelude, Rachel, can you tell us what you were doing in Antarctica?
Oh, well, I'm so lucky. I've been to Antarctica twice. Once in the summer of 2005, 2006, as I was down there as part of a study group doing field work. So that and that's the experience that I based that poem on, because we were camping out on the Ross ice shelf, and yeah, it was just the most phenomenal experience. I've been to Antarctica since in 2013 as a regular tourist to the West Antarctic Peninsula. So, but this one, even though I wrote it much later, was based on that first experience because yeah, as you can imagine, camping out on an ice sheet is and being stuck in a tent with my tent mate was absolutely lovely and we got on really well, which was wonderful. But it's but I just wanted to get across that feeling that not only the otherworldliness of Antarctica, but also that the sense that the weather is basically controls absolutely everything. That's the weather is the god that's pulling all the strings. So that's what that poem was based on.
Well, I wondered also if there was a poem. It seemed to me, you can tell me if I'm right or wrong about this, that the poem reflects a tension between the wonder and beauty and grandeur of being in an environment like that, with a sense of trespass that perhaps we shouldn't even be there. Was that going on as well?
Yes. Well, yes. I think that is the challenge of writing nature poetry or nature-based poetry, because especially in Australia, where everywhere we go is unceded Indigenous territory, and so we're constantly, having to to acknowledge and confront the not just the horrendous past, but also the fact that we are still that it is entirely unresolved. The Aboriginal people's spiritual connection and ownership is ongoing, and that is a constant. That's something that I think, as Australians, whenever we're writing about Australian landscape, that needs to be in our minds. We need to be writing, through those considerations, like through that filter and perspective. And it was going to Antarctica, which is, you would think, a land that is completely free of those sorts of considerations. But the reason they're free of those sort of considerations is they're so unimaginably inhospitable that it's not that. So that the tension there is that well, maybe humans aren't just meant to be there at all. So there is still that feeling of trespass and lack of belonging, I guess, trying to deal with with those issues. So it's again, I think there's nowhere in the world that isn't considering the long history of humanity on the globe. There's those I find that even when you think you're going to be free of it, you're not.
Yeah, and there's another thing going on for me anyway, and that is that once again in our sort of urban lives, we tend to forget that we are living in a constant state of peril. And we are actually, it's not quite always existential, but nonetheless. But when you put yourself in an environment like that, the peril comes to the forefront, doesn't it?
Oh, very much so. And it was, even though when I was there at camping on the ice sheet, this is back in 2000, the temperatures were, there were a few days there rose over freezing, and so our ice kitchen, and because basically you sort of carve, even though you're staying in a polar tent, your a lot of your facilities for camping, you carve out of you dig away in the ice to create an ice kitchen or your little bathroom, like toilet cubicle and things. And because if once the temperature gets to 1 or 2 degrees, things start to melt. And so even so climate change is constantly on your mind as well. And then of course the science that we were assisting with, like the meteorological observations, ice coring, biological census taking, all of those things, the realities of a warming world and a melting Antarctica were in the forefronts of our mind the entire time. So so that humanity's impact on our polar regions is inescapable.
So does it change? Did it change your perspective on humanity and nature?
I was well, no. It didn't change anything. I think it just reinforced what I already had come to believe.
Okay, a very empowering experience then.
Yes, it definitely. And well, it's but these days it's impossible to be alive and paying attention and not be confronted almost daily by the evidence.
Yeah. All right. Do you have another poem for us?
Yes. Oh, this one's a bit more fun. Great white shark. Down here, sunlight casts its wavering nets, but we are already caught, the cage full of quivering humanity, dangling like bait over depths immaculate in their mystery. We fling our sight into the blue, seeking the thickening shadow, that clotting of cobalt which defibrillates the heart instants before the torpedo shape even resolves itself out there, beyond the mesh, on the inner face of the mask. The rumbled cadence of the hooker quickens as we hang, exhibiting ourselves to the wild. Stripped of land and way out of our depth, we cling to the faith that for these swift minutes, caught in this inverted world, we will continue to breathe. It's difficult to know what to tell you, what I saved from that oddly geometric place, the hard blue plains speared with light, the hollow toll of cage on boat, those plates of cold sliding between wetsuit and skin. I can't tell you much about the pale underbelly, the fin, the slashed gills, or the blowback of shock after the strike. I can't remember much about its solidity, the way its skin seized the shine from the water and swallowed it whole. Strangely, I can't recall much about the teeth, but I can tell you about the eye, its density, its blackness, the way she watched us circling with long, deliberate strokes. And the other thing I can say is how it felt to see that final contrail of silver coins from her tail's ragged fluke, and in that silence hear my heart implausibly still beating.
So really, you can't recall much about the teeth?
Well, no. I mean, that's a little bit of I was exaggerating for the sake of the poem. But it's her eye, and just that moment of connection, because you can tell she's looking straight at you. So yeah, it's it was. This was I wrote that as part of a. That was another sequence of poems as well, but really by the after going over it, it was really only the core poems about the shark rather than the whole trip, because that's down at the south in Port Lincoln, South Australia. There's if you travel for several hours off the southern coast of South Australia, there's a tiny little island called Neptune Island that is surrounded. It's got seal colonies all around it. So, of course, because of the seals, it's also a great white shark breeding site. So the population of great white sharks down there is quite healthy. So that's where cage diving with sharks happens in South Australia. And so I went down there knowing that I really wanted to write about it. And so was just came back with a notebook full of notes. And it's one of those rare situations where I've known before it happened that I wanted to write about it. And so was very conscious of processing the entire experience as fodder for writing.
Yeah. So I have to ask, I think I know the answer to this question, but I have to ask you anyway, when you head off to Antarctica or Lake Eyre or, shark diving or whatever you want to call that, it's more than just thrill seeking. It's more than just experiences, although it's those things as well. It's looking for something more profound, isn't it?
Yes. I wouldn't consider myself a thrill seeker. I'm just one of those people that really prioritizes a sense of wonder. Like if I'm going to leave my home, which I do very infrequently, I'm a bit of a hermit, then it's to go to a place that has, I guess, few humans and some. I'm very much a landscape tourist rather than a city tourist, I guess. Yeah.
Well, thanks. That's 4 poems from The Flaw and the Pattern. Now you've got some poems, new poems for us.
I'm conscious that I've been yabbering away and we're probably running a bit short of time. So I'm happy just to leap around and do the shorter ones first, if that's all right.
No, do them all. Whatever you want.
Well, I guess the one that I would like to read, just because I got the opportunity for such an incredible, because we were just talking about experiences that I'm very attracted to different landscapes, and like for the to view or to experience non-human elements of the world. But in 2019, Australian Poetry and Nature, Art and Habitat in the organisation in Italy offered a residency, but it was to do with cheese making, which is a very human activity, even though, of course, it involves cows. So it was a residency to go and experience this really incredible landscape and human history of using that landscape in terms of the way that they use pasture grasses and herd, and there's a nomadic tradition of cows being grazed on the lower slopes of the Alps, and some of the best cheeses in the world are made from the cows. Swiss browns, particular species of cows, this incredibly lush and gorgeous pasture grass, and then the Bergamene tribes basically in charge of herding the cows and making these incredible cheeses. So I had to spend a month walking around this landscape and learning all about the making of Taleggio cheese in the Taleggio Valley. So I might read one of those poems first, just to show that it's that I can write about humans as well as other landscapes. So I'll read this one first. It's called Reality Check. Halfway between magma and starlight, this place is far from simple, everything the colour of joy and envy. Here a Lindsay bird would call me an emotionally articulate, meadow-frequenting piece of shit dumbass. I watch like a stray cat in the night, tapetum lucidum flashing. My night vision is keen, but I can't tell how much data reflects back, not even passing the retina. I don't see that the kids have moved out, the houses squatting, damp and shuttered. There's a brisk trade in Wandisi signs. Nomads drive trucks and trail bikes. Apprentices are front page news. Ponds are dry and cows drink from bathtubs scummed with the dead. Mowers are in vogue, but prosthetics for maimed wildlife are yet to catch on. Forests are making a comeback. Cows chew grass, grain over grass. The cheese has moved down into dairies while plants clamber up to escape the heat. Species creep, climate crisis, and who knows what's happening with the snow. It all looks bucolic, these roads up the mountain like glossy eco-porn. But the marketing people forgot the rainbow. If I wanted to be flippant, the cliche about change being the only constant springs to mind, but flippant people shit me, as do cliches. And how much change can the planet take anyway? Not more than 1.5 degrees Celsius is the consensus. Look, I don't know my chestnut from my beech, but some things are clear. The forest gives way to the fence. Vapor trails crosshatch the blue. The world is torn. The chaffinches are singing before I open my eyes.
I'm glad for your introduction to that poem, because I would not have instantly recognised it for a description of what you were saying you were describing, which is the Taleggio Valley. To me, when I read it, and maybe I misread it, but I saw it as a pre-apocalyptic or post-apocalyptic or in the midst of an apocalypse poem, and kind of like, warning signs. But also that sort of sense, which I think we all have, that there is beauty everywhere, and it's kind of seductive that we kind of forget that the world is torn. In a way, we sort of are imprisoned by this beauty into thinking that everything's going to be all right, but perhaps not.
Yeah.
We need to be paying attention Is that sort of what you're trying to get into?
Yes. Yeah, that's a really like very sharp analysis. I think that that's really what I was trying to get at, is that if as somebody who was coming in to that place with very little background on the culture and the landscape, it's very easy to see beauty and have a sense of wonder, where somebody who has lived in that place and understands has that deep grounded knowledge and broad perspective of history will see it in a very different way. So that's because I often find that when I'm traveling in and seeing different places, there's something about traveling and moving that stimulates that my writing. I'm always writing when I'm traveling, but I'm also very conscious that my knowledge of these places is so shallow. It's just a thin skin on the top. And that there's that tension, I think, by that who am I to speak about these places? And so I'm always very conscious of trying to capture a sense of within my voice of knowledge. I'm not claiming any great depth of understanding about this place, that I am coming to it as a stranger and a tourist. So yeah, I'm hoping that comes across, and being there for a month and basically staying in the Taleggio Valley with a group of people who were biologists and geologists and ecologists, and anthropologists. So I was in a very lucky position to be able to get a few grains of understanding about the precariousness of what I was seeing. That this is a landscape that's in the midst of enormous flux and cultural and ecological change. Yeah, so.
And there's something to be said for the eye of the stranger, because in my experience, it works both ways. That, migrants to Australia will tell me things about Australia that I no longer see, but that are very visible to them.
Oh, that's interesting. Yeah.
Well, we better get on to another poem.
Okay. I'm going to work. So I'm sorry, David. I'm completely upending
Right. Let's do it.
the order that I gave you. So I'm going to read Horseshoe Bay now. I love this place the way a dog loves its human, wordlessly and to the bone. The shark spotter unzips the long high blue, and the sea is so clear I float in green light over the dark weight of empty. I walk the blue slate path to Knight's Beach, 3 feet taller and not needing anyone's hand, past the Norfolk pines for the white war dead and my old new house I'll never own. I've known this place since my skin was fresh as the sand after a wave, now uncreased and coarse as the granites. I feel its mood, the pilot-light glimmer of hope for dolphins, how everything tastes better when you're coated in its salt. I started this poem with whiz fizz and a historic Port Elliot pennant. It closes with chili squid and a cold glass of white. I was dumped here, tumbled breathless, first by waves and later a man, heart and faith battered, learning the sea and love are fickle and the brutal shock of metaphor. My days here are bright and free as January strains to turn sand into glass. Sweet shade and granite, grass and ants, prams and dogs, the sky and sea so blue from the vast blackness behind them. Long ago, this bay was forest. These granites spat from volcanoes. The spirits of so many hover, mine just one ghost in the mine just one ghost world in the throng. This is how it happens. Everything will be different. Everything will be the same.
Oh, well, that's a love poem, isn't it?
Yes, oh, very much so. I think this is very close to where I first met you, David, at the Goolwa Salt on the Tongue Poetry Festival.
That's right.
Back in 2010.
That's right. Look, I like to think that a deep love of place is something that we all have for somewhere, that it's a very human thing, that place speaks to us and it imprints itself on us. Do you think that's true, or do you think that we're becoming more disconnected to place?
I think that they're both true. I think that we are become as our world changes and does have a bit of a disconnecting influence on us, but I think that maybe even the last year has, with the pandemic, I think people are starting to rediscover the depth of their connection to place. And I wanted to include this poem because I was suddenly conscious that so many of the poems that I had chosen were all traveling poems. And this one, very much really is a laying bare of my love for a place that I have known for 5 decades. So, I think it will be very interesting to read the work of poets and other writers and other artists post COVID to see whether a rediscovery of our connection to place and local connections, whether that there is a bit of a renaissance in that area. I really hope so, because I personally think that that it's a love of our local environment is a really important component of bringing people to environmental activism. That's that you to know something deeply and to have a knowledge about the different bird species that we see out the window, to know when that tree is going in our backyard is going to fruit, all those to notice the change of seasons and the waxing and waning of the moon, all of those things that I think that when they're sort of the bedrock to loving and valuing the world we live in, and that's we can't expect people to fight to protect that if they're not coming from a place of love and a place of deep understanding. And I think local knowledge and feeling a deep sense of rootedness to place is a really important aspect of that.
Yeah, if people don't have that, then they don't see what's threatening the place. So it's very hard to be environmentally active without understanding the threats. I know that First Nations people have a very strong connection to place, and it's handed down from generation to generation. There's history and law that goes with it. Is your connection to Horseshoe Bay, does it go beyond your own lifespan, or is it just what you've picked up since you grew up there?
No, there's no real ancestral connection. I'm one of, I guess, I look upon people with deep ancestral connections to place and a real and a knowledge of their family tree. I'm a little bit envious. I know as somebody who I don't know half of my family tree because of like adoption and sort of family rupture. So it's all basically any connection that I have to place is really pretty much to do with my own experience and not doesn't really go any further back than that. So right. But I think that's also a positive thing. I think if I can feel immensely connected to place with really nothing other than my own understanding or my own personal history, then there is hope for the world. Because if I can love the earth, anyone can.
All right, what do you got for us next?
Okay. All right. Climate change poem. Catastrophic fire danger, level 6. These days are the worst kind of extraordinary, blunt as mirrors. It's not the heat, it's the wind. The ruthless air scrapes the house, honing itself as it passes. The tubs are stacked by the door, passports, poetry, our history glued in albums. The dig tree leaf Andrew gave me in our first week. Frames hold flares of light. January reels beyond the glass. I prime the pumps. Today, I'm climate bait, peering out from inside the news. I scan the blue for smoke. Plants, words, thoughts, all crackle to dust in this catastrophic light. The axis of the earth shifts. These ranges now the centre of the world. Leaves glare like blades. This day feels long as a life, bloated with its full share of tea, dread, and tedium. The throb of old losses fades. I fear only what can still be lost. Green aches in the light. I scan the edges of blue like ticking my thumb over the plastic comfort of a rosary. Then, at last, that gleaming hour when veranda posts and perennials are webbed with alien beauty. The trees and house sink in clotted shadow while the troposphere is empty with blue. Birds are scraps of ash, circling in hot plumes of sky, and standing only in my sweat, I dream of drizzle and overcoats. The slow shuffle of waves, the chill mineral gaze of stars.
Yeah, so you mentioned that you live in Basket Range, which I understand.
I'm so sorry about my voice. I've got a cold.
It's all right. You mentioned that you live in Basket Range, which is surrounded by hills, and in the Adelaide Hills, which has had some fairly catastrophic fires in recent years. So there is a sense of danger on an ongoing basis, and this poem speaks to that. How do you cope with living with that uncertainty all the time?
Oh, well, it gets harder and harder every year, I've got to say. I get more and more anxious with each passing year. I've lived here for 28 years now, and it's at the moment, it's with the gorgeous autumn weather. It's I've got autumn and spring are those brief sort of payoff periods where everything is so beautiful, but then you get the winter with the frosts and it's freezing, and then the fire danger. It is I don't want to live anywhere else, but I do go through massive anxiety in the summer. Yeah, it's and every year that it doesn't burn is just a year closer to when it will, because yeah, it's going to happen at some stage. So
yeah, so that sense of climate clickbait is very palpable.
Oh, well, it was with the summer of 2019, 2020, it was seeing what happened in the eastern states, and we had just a small taste of it here with the Kerry Gully Lobethal fires, where so many people lost their houses, so many animals were killed. There's that constant sense of just the ticking, I guess, because everything is just getting so hotter and drier, and
I've noticed that you've written several poems about fires, and you've had some history of relationship with the fires, haven't you?
Yes, well, very close calls. I guess I keep fear is a a continual theme I keep touching on, whether it's but just bizarrely, even though our house and property has not been touched by bushfire, my parents who live down in the suburbs, their house burnt down. There's a poem in the collection about going back to my childhood house that had just been burnt down. Yes, that was a cigarette-based accident. Yes.
Okay, well, that makes that clear, because you say the throb of old losses fades. I fear only what can still be lost. So you had those old losses when you were a child.
Yes.
Mm. All right, we have one more poem, last poem for us today.
Oh, I mean, it's a bit of a long one, so we don't have to do it if we're out of time.
Let's do it.
Oh, okay. Beaufort scale for internal weather. 0. Sunlight hits mirrors with direct honesty. Words lie exactly where they were left, ready to snap into bright sentences. Sleep welcomes and releases with soft precision of the tide. 1. Skin tightens into scales, not armour, but a thickening that gleams, absorbing light and heat for those minutes when clouds obscure the sun. Silence and sleep are delightful as fur. 2. Light breeze is the first sign of barometric change, yet this weather feels romantic. Even the wind is poetry. The air is clean and familiar, but inland, leaves are rustling. 3. The draft is gentle but rising, leaves now in constant motion. Thoughts are scattered and sentences crackle with static. White space on the page permits quiet insurrections. 4. This is still manageable. Coffee cups or wine glasses are always in reach as the wind raises dust and flurries papers. Offshore, anxieties form whitecaps. 5. A fresh breeze implies cleanliness and health. This is inaccurate. Lists blow away and life feels cluttered with the flotsam of others' decisions. Words spray and sleep sways to a rhythm that is hard to keep. 6. Waves build and break in relentless sets. There's whistling in the wires and the sun is constantly behind clouds. So who is to say when it passes the yardarm? The phone rings out, the inbox fills, sleep is tangled in the looping playback of regret. 7. Every direction is headwind. There is only the bed, the couch, and the weight of deadlines. Dark energy drives every process. Strange, unsettling thoughts blink on like stars, sharp and old. Sleep is a fox. 8. The golden age is always in the past. Everything is edge and squall, the words streaking the air like dirty foam. All relationships are packs with grief. The sky is low, pressure high. To leave the house is to risk damage. 9. The weight of air takes on the heft of the universe. The dark seethes with anxieties, and sleep is far too kind for the cynicism of night. Communication lines are down. Chimneys and roofs are threatened. To venture out is unthinkable. 10. The world can only be read in translation. All trees not uprooted are potential targets. Sharp edges gleam with promise. Moon-shaped hollows are carved beneath eyes. This was all decided years ago. 11. Thoughts shake out their wildness like savages, as if the magic of facts can hold back tides, gales, wars. Self-medication, self-harm. Words are expletives targeted at the body. Everything beautiful is far away, so distant it's invisible. 12. Widespread structural damage, zero visibility. This is the point of collapse, the black hole. Yet there's a calm that only now feels as if it's been there. A pure, deep truth waiting to be unearthed like a fossilized bone. Here in the center, it is clear and still. It is up to you.
Well, that's a wonderful poem to finish off with, isn't it? Yeah, I had to look it up, the Beaufort scale. I didn't know what it was. Wonderful play on that scale to sort of make it internalize it. I noticed the scale you've gone from 1 to 12. The scale actually goes up to 17 with the last 5 relating to typhoons. You didn't want to channel your inner typhoon for another few stanzas of this scale?
Well, when I learned the Beaufort scale in school, in geography class, maybe this shows how old I am, it only went up to 12. So they've clearly, they've clearly added another 5 categories.
They're only used in China and Taiwan, apparently. They're not much used to do with typhoons, but yeah. Great fun.
Oh, thank goodness! I think that poem would be unreadable if I had
it would get pretty intense. Yeah, what made you internalize it that way? It's cool.
Well, it's funny. One of my friends has Meniere's disease, which is a inner ear condition, and we were talking about how our bodies respond to changes in barometric pressure. And I'd often noticed that, when a cold change comes after a heat wave, that or there's or things go from being very cold to, like, if there's just a huge and sudden change in barometric pressure, that I tend to just go, I just get really exhausted and fatigued for some reason. And I was talking to a friend about it, and she was saying, oh yes, my husband's like a human barometer. He can always, like, his mood changes with and I was thinking, oh, that's really weird. And then my friend was saying, yeah, she notices changes in her Meniere's symptoms when there are massive changes in barometric pressure. And it just sort of got me thinking. And then when I looked up the Beaufort scale, it is the language with which, because it's all to do with the roughness of the sea and the severity of the wind, because those are things that you can't, that they have to be described in a certain way, and I just found that the descriptions in the definitions were very poetic, with the leaves rustling and the white caps. And I just thought, yeah, that's so. It was sort of, it didn't take much to make that leap to start using wind and sea metaphors to start describing the mental health changes, basically. Yeah.
Yeah, it wouldn't hurt for us all to have a field guide to internal weather anyway, because part of the problem is that we don't read the signs of other people's internal weather very well.
Yes, yeah, that's yes, I wouldn't mind being able to, just have a little sign saying, yep,
8 on the scale.
yeah, exactly. I'm at level 9. Keep
Well, thanks very much, Rachel. That was a wonderful reading. We had a few technological problems, I think, with the sound coming through. I hope it works out all right. But it was wonderful to have you on Poets Corner and talking about writing the part, sensing the whole, the ecosystem beyond the window. When this video is posted, it will include information on Rachel's books, so look out for that. And please check in again at the end of June when Poets Corner will feature Anthony Lawrence on the theme of the poetic impulse.
Well, thank you so much, David. It was a real pleasure and an honour. So thank you very much. It was great to talk to you.
Great. See you all then next month. Bye.